Maybe our janitor wants to teach calculus today. Maybe our janitor wants to teach calculus today. Go ahead. Show us what you know. Go ahead. Go ahead.
She will never understand a single line of this. Professor Nathaniel Pierce said it into the microphone like it was a fact, not an insult. Then he pointed his black marker straight at the woman cleaning the back aisle. The auditorium went still for half a second. Then came the laughter. Not loud at first. A few sharp bursts from the front row. A nervous chuckle from a graduate student who knew better but wanted to belong. A soft laugh from someone near the cameras. Angela Reed stood beside her yellow cleaning cart with one hand wrapped around the mop handle. She was 32 years old, black, tired from an overnight shift, and wearing a gray Harvard facilities uniform that fit her like it had been made for someone else. Nathaniel looked her up and down, slowly, deliberately. His smile widened. In fact, he said, turning back to the crowd, "I will make this interesting. Anyone in this hall who can solve my equation in 2 minutes gets my chair, my office, and my full public apology." He paused. Then his voice turned playful. "And since I am a generous man, I will marry them on the spot." The room broke open. Laughter rolled up the seats and hit the high ceiling. Angela did not move. On the stage behind Nathaniel, the equation glowed across a 12-foot screen. White symbols on a black background. Clean, elegant, dangerous. Most people in that room saw mystery. Angela saw a wound. Professor Margaret Ellis, visiting from Princeton, sat at the panel table with her hands folded in front of her. She did not laugh. Her eyes moved from Nathaniel to Angela, then back to the screen. In the third row, Rachel Morgan, a reporter from the Boston Ledger, slowly lowered her pen. She had come expecting a story about academic brilliance. She had not expected cruelty before breakfast. Nathaniel stepped off the stage with the marker still in his hand. He walked down the center aisle like the room belonged to him. 38 years old. Youngest full professor in the department. Perfect navy suit. Perfect silver tie. A man who had learned very early that a polished voice could make arrogance sound like authority. He stopped feet from Angela. "Even her," he said, lifting the marker toward her face. The woman with the mop. More laughter. Angela's eyes stayed on the floor. Her breathing was quiet but not calm. Her fingers tightened once around the mop handle. The skin across her knuckles went pale. Nathaniel tossed the marker. It struck the tile near her shoes, bounced once, and rolled until it touched the wheel of her cleaning cart. "Pick that up while you are down there," he said. That was when the laughter changed. It grew sharper, meaner. A young man in the front row looked down at his notes, ashamed. Another student lifted his phone halfway, then lowered it. He wanted to record, but some part of him still knew this was wrong. Angela bent down, slowly, not because she was weak, because every eye in the hall was on her back. She picked up the marker. For 1 second, the camera caught her face on the live stream monitor at the rear of the room. Her expression was hard to read. Not fear, not humiliation. Something quieter, something buried. Nathaniel turned back toward the stage, already enjoying the next line in his head. But Angela did not hand him the marker. She looked past him, at the equation. Her shoulders stopped moving. Her eyes narrowed behind old glasses held together with a thin strip of white tape. The room kept laughing for 2 more seconds. Then one person noticed. Then another. Angela was no longer looking like a woman being mocked. She was looking like someone who had just recognized an old enemy. Professor Ellis leaned forward. Rachel Morgan lifted her pen again. Nathaniel felt the shift before he understood it. The laughter was thinning. The air had changed. He turned halfway, still smiling, but the smile had begun to lose its grip. Angela took 1 step toward the screen, then another. Her shoes made small, careful sounds against the polished floor. She did not raise her voice. She did not ask for respect. She only looked at the equation and said, softly enough that the microphone almost missed it, "Line 3 is wrong." The auditorium died. No coughs, no laughter, no moving chairs. Just the low hum of the projector and the faint squeak of the cleaning cart wheel behind her. Nathaniel stared at her. For the first time that morning, he truly saw her. Not the uniform, not the mop, not the job. Her. Angela Reed held the marker in her cracked hand, looking at the foundation of his entire career. And everyone in that room was about to learn that invisible people still see everything. Nathaniel laughed once, but it came out too quickly. "Excuse me?" Angela kept her eyes as on the screen. The marker rested in her right hand, uncapped now. A thin black line of ink stained the side of her thumb. "Line 3, she repeated. The assumption fails at the origin. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone whispered, "What did she say?" Nathaniel's smile returned, but it was smaller now, tighter. The kind of smile a man uses when he wants the room to believe he is still in control. "That is very charming," he said. "But this is not a community college tutoring session. This is a Harvard colloquium." The words landed hard. Angela blinked once. Professor Margaret Ellis looked down at her notes, then up at the screen. Her eyes moved quickly across the equation. Line 1, line 2, line 3. Then she stopped. Nathaniel saw it. For the first time, a flash of irritation cut through his face. "Professor Ellis," he said, still facing Angela, "I am sure we do not need to waste everyone's time on a facilities employee misreading notation." Margaret did not answer right away. That silence was worse than disagreement. In the third row, Rachel Morgan slowly lifted her recorder and placed it closer to the aisle. Her reporter's instincts had fully awakened now. She could feel a story changing shape in front of her. Angela turned slightly toward Nathaniel. "I am not misreading it," she said. Her voice was still low, not proud, not angry, steady. Nathaniel stepped closer, "Then explain it." The room tightened. A man in the second row leaned forward. A young woman near the back pressed both hands around her phone, recording with trembling fingers. The live stream camera stayed locked on Angela's face. Angela looked at the board again. The symbols were bright enough to reflect in her glasses. Behind that reflection was another room. Smaller, darker. A supply closet on the third floor. 4 in the morning. A cracked mirror. A mop sink. A woman tying her hair into the same plain bun she had worn for more than a decade. That morning, 90 minutes earlier, Angela Reed had been alone. The Harvard Science Center was almost silent at that hour. Not peaceful. Buildings like that were never peaceful before dawn. They held too many ambitions, too many locked offices, too many names engraved on doors. Angela moved through the third floor with her cart squeaking softly beside her. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her shoes whispered across the tile. In the distance, a radiator clicked like an old man clearing his throat. She stopped outside room 314, the office of Professor Nathaniel Pierce. The trash bin was half full. Coffee cups, printed emails, a torn envelope from a journal office, a yellow legal pad page folded twice and crushed under a sandwich wrapper. Angela emptied the bin with gloved hands. Then she saw the writing. Not all of it, just enough. A boundary condition. A crossed-out limit. The same mistake written twice, once in black ink, once in blue. Her breath caught. She looked toward the hallway. Empty. She was not stealing. She told herself that every time, what people threw away no longer belonged to them. That was the rule she had made to survive, in a place where knowledge fell into trash cans every night. She slid the page between the cardboard backing of her inventory folder and the weekly supply sheet. That folder was old, gray, labeled in pencil. Cleaning inventory, quarter 3. Inside it were 92 pages no professor had ever seen. Proofs, corrections, half arguments, full arguments. Work done after midnight at a kitchen table while her brother slept in the next room. Work done before dawn with cheap coffee and an old calculus textbook held together by duct tape. Angela had once belonged in rooms like this, before the hospital bills, before her mother's hands became too weak to hold a spoon, before her brother Marcus was 12, and pretending not to hear his sister crying in the bathroom, because she had withdrawn from MIT that afternoon. She had not failed. She had chosen. but the world had a cruel habit of calling sacrifice failure when it came from people without money. At 4:30 that morning, she had stood in the supply closet and called Marcus. "You up?" "Barely," he mumbled. "Eat breakfast before class. Real breakfast." "Yes, Mom. And do not buy coffee with your grocery money." A pause. "You always know I raised you. Of course I know." He laughed softly, still half asleep. "Love you, Angie." She closed her eyes. "Love you too." She did not tell him about the page in her folder. She did not tell him that Professor Pierce had built a career on a problem with a crack in its foundation. She did not tell him that for 6 months, she had carried the correction with her like a match in her pocket. Now, in Hall G, under the lights, with 180 people watching, Nathaniel Pierce waited for her to embarrass herself. Angela lifted the marker. She walked to the board, and instead of shrinking, she reached up and circled line 3. The circle around line 3 looked small from the back of the auditorium, but to Nathaniel Pierce, it looked like a crack running through a marble floor. Angela tapped the board once with the marker. "You defined the lower limit as if the function behaves the same from both sides," she said. "It does not. The right-hand limit exists. The left-hand limit changes the boundary term." A graduate student in the second row whispered, "No way." Beside him, Evan Miller lowered his head over his notebook. Evan was 26, pale from too many late nights, and loyal to Professor Pierce in the careful way young academics are loyal to powerful men. He had copied this proof 3 times. He had taught it in discussion section. He had defended it online when strangers questioned it. Now his pencil moved fast. Then it stopped. His lips parted. He turned one page back, then another. Nathaniel saw Evan's face, and his own jaw tightened. "Evan," he said, too sharply. Evan looked up like a boy caught touching a locked drawer. "Professor," he said, barely loud enough. "She may be identifying a real issue with the boundary behavior." The room changed again, not loudly. Worse, quietly. 180 people began thinking at the same time. Heads tilted. Phones rose. Pens scratched. Nobody was laughing now. Nathaniel turned toward the audience and lifted both hands. "Let us all take a breath," he said. "This is exactly how misinformation spreads in academic spaces. Someone sees notation they do not understand, says it with confidence, and suddenly the room rewards the performance." Angela did not answer. She wrote one correction beside his line. Small. Precise. The marker squeaked once. Professor Margaret Ellis stood. Not fast, not dramatically, just enough for every person in Hall G to notice. She moved toward the board, her black jacket shifting over the back of her chair. At 61, Margaret had spent 4 decades in rooms where men mistook her calm for permission. She had learned to make silence work for her. She stopped beside Angela and looked at the correction. Nathaniel's face hardened. "Professor Ellis, with respect, this is my presentation." "With respect," Margaret said, without looking at him, "you made it public when you turned it into a cowager." A murmur moved through the room. Rachel Morgan wrote that down word for word. Margaret leaned closer to the board. Her eyes moved across Angela's notation. Then she looked at the original equation. Her expression did not change, but something in her shoulders did. She understood. Angela stepped back half a pace, giving her space. That small gesture did something to Margaret. It was not deference, it was discipline. The discipline of someone who knew the board did not belong to her yet, but the truth did. Margaret turned toward the room. "The objection is valid," she said. The words dropped cleanly. No decoration, no escape. Nathaniel blinked once. Evan closed his notebook with both hands. A woman near the back covered her mouth. The young black undergraduate who had been standing by the rear wall slowly lowered herself into an empty aisle seat, as if her knees had finally given out. Nathaniel laughed again, but this time it had no body in it. "Valid as an observation," he said, "not as a solution. Let us remember what was actually offered. A closed form in 2 minutes, not a footnote, not a complaint, a solution." Angela turned to him then, for the first time fully. She looked at the man who had never learned her name. The man who had stepped around her mop for years, as if she were part of the building. The man who had tossed a marker at her feet because cruelty had always been cheap for him. "I know what you offered," she said. Nathaniel's nostrils flared. Then proceed. He pulled the stopwatch from his pocket and held it up. His thumb hovered over the button. 2 minutes, he said. Since you are so certain. Angela looked at the stopwatch, then at the room, then at Margaret Ellis. Margaret gave her one small nod. That nod was not permission. It was recognition. Angela turned back to the board. The lights above the stage hummed softly. The projector fan clicked. Somewhere in the auditorium, someone whispered a prayer so quietly, even they may not have known they said it. Nathaniel pressed the button. Begin. Angela did not rush. That was what frightened him first. She stood still for 5 full seconds, reading the equation from top to bottom. Not searching, not hoping, reading. Like a surgeon looking at an X-ray. Like a mechanic hearing the single bad note in an engine. Like a woman who had lived beside this problem longer than anyone knew. Then she lifted the marker. She crossed out nothing. She destroyed nothing. She simply wrote beneath his work. First, redefine the boundary. The room leaned forward. Evan whispered, "Oh my God." Nathaniel's eyes snapped to him. But Evan was no longer looking at Nathaniel. He was looking at Angela. Angela wrote the first line like she had written it 100 times before. Not fast enough to look desperate. Not slow enough to look unsure. Her hand moved with quiet authority, the black marker cutting across the whiteboard in short, clean strokes. She redefined the boundary term, then pulled the function apart with a substitution that made 3 people in the front row sit up at the same time. Evan Miller whispered again, softer this time. She is using symmetry. Nathaniel heard him. So did everyone else. The sentence moved through the room like a spark under dry paper. Professor Margaret Ellis sat back down, but she did not relax. Her eyes stayed fixed on Angela's hand. Margaret had watched famous mathematicians panic at boards smaller than this. She had seen brilliant men hide behind language when their ideas failed them. Angela was doing the opposite. She was removing language, 1 line at a time. Rachel Morgan's recorder sat on her lap now, red light glowing. Her pen had stopped moving because she no longer trusted herself to summarize what she was seeing. Some moments had to be caught whole. At the back of the hall, the live stream monitor showed the viewer count climbing. 200. 500. 900. Someone had texted the link, then someone else. Then half the department. Nathaniel took 1 step toward the board. "Hold on," he said. Angela did not stop writing Miss Reed. She wrote the next transformation, Miss Reed. This time his voice cracked through the room. Angela paused, marker touching the board but not moving. Nathaniel pointed at the expression she had just written. That substitution does not preserve the domain as stated. For 1 second, relief flickered across his face. He had found something. A technical objection, a handhold on the cliff. A few students looked from him to the board. Evan leaned forward until his elbows almost slid off his knees. Angela turned her head slightly. "It does not preserve your domain," she said. "It preserves the corrected one." A silence followed. Then Margaret Ellis closed her eyes for half a second, not in disbelief, in recognition. Nathaniel's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Angela underlined a small notation near the boundary condition. It was almost invisible from the middle rows, but the camera caught it. On the live stream, the close-up filled the screen. A small adjustment, a quiet correction. The kind of thing that looked harmless until it brought down everything above it. Evan pressed both hands to his forehead. "Oh, Lord," he whispered. A nervous laugh came from somewhere in the room. Not because anything was funny. Because the pressure had to escape somehow. Angela kept going. Her marker moved faster now. She introduced a contour. She labeled it gamma. She shifted the integral into a shape the room could finally understand. The expression on the board, once wide and proud, began to narrow. It began to fold. Nathaniel watched it happen, and behind his eyes a private calculation began. He had spent 9 years teaching this problem as impossible. 9 years placing it at the center of his lectures, his reputation, his grant proposals, his invitations, his authority. People did not just admire him for attacking the Pierce limit. They admired him because he had convinced them it could not be beaten. If Angela finished, she was not just solving an equation. She was proving that he had built a cathedral on sand. The stopwatch read 1 minute and 13 seconds. Angela circled a term. Here, she said. The word was quiet, but it pulled the entire room forward. She wrote the residue in one clean fraction. A professor in the first row stood without meaning to. His chair scraped the floor behind him. He did not sit back down. Another faculty member stood. Then a graduate student. Nathaniel turned toward Margaret. Professor Ellis, he said, his voice low and tight. I request formal verification before this goes any further. Margaret looked at him. You requested a public challenge, she said. I requested rigor. No, Margaret said. You requested humiliation. Rigor arrived anyway. The room went dead still. Rachel Morgan's eyes widened. Nathaniel's face flushed red from the collar up. Angela did not look at either of them. She had no room left for their war. Her entire body had narrowed into the work. Breath, hand, board, thought. The stopwatch read 52 seconds. On the live stream, the viewer count crossed 3,000. In a dorm room across the river, Marcus Reed's phone buzzed on his desk. Then again. Then again. He was 23, halfway through a finance problem set, wearing sweatpants and the same northeastern hoodie Angela had bought him on clearance 2 Christmases ago. He ignored the first message, then the second. The third came from his roommate. Bro, why is your sister on Harvard's live stream? Marcus frowned. He opened the link. The screen loaded. For a moment, he did not understand what he was seeing. Then he saw the gray uniform, the old glasses, the bun, the way she held the marker. His chair rolled back on the floor. No, he whispered. Angela wrote another line. The integral collapsed again. Marcus stood slowly, one hand over his mouth. On the screen, his sister was not cleaning a hallway. She was standing in front of the world, and the world was finally catching up. Marcus did not sit back down. He stood in the center of his dorm room with his laptop glowing on the desk, one hand over his mouth, the other gripping his phone so hard his knuckles hurt. On the screen, Angela wrote with the same careful hand she used on grocery lists, rent checks, and birthday cards she always signed from both of them, because she said family did not arrive alone. His roommate Jordan stepped in from the hallway with a towel over his shoulder. Man, is that really her? Marcus could not answer. He had seen Angela tired, angry, quiet, worried over bills, asleep at the kitchen table with a pen still in her hand. He had seen her sew a button back on his shirt at midnight before a scholarship interview. He had seen her stretch one pot of soup across 4 days and pretend she was not hungry. He had never seen this. Not once. On the live stream, Angela's marker moved again. The room in Hall G was no longer watching a janitor. It was watching a mind take back space. The stopwatch read 40 seconds. Nathaniel stepped closer to the board, eyes narrowed. His face had changed completely now. No theater, no charm, no professorly warmth for the crowd, only calculation. He saw this the next line before she wrote it, and his stomach dropped. Because she was right, not partly, not almost. Right. He took a breath sharp through his nose. Miss Reed, he said louder than before, you are skipping justification on the convergence step. Angela kept writing. I am not skipping it. You have not shown it. I am writing the part you missed. A low sound moved through the room. Not laughter, not applause. Something between shock and release. Nathaniel's ears burned. This is not a courtroom, he snapped. Angela finally turned. No, she said. But you asked for witnesses. The sentence landed clean. Rachel Morgan stopped breathing for a second. Then she wrote it down so fast the tip of her pen tore the paper. Margaret Ellis leaned forward, eyes shining with a fierce, restrained attention. She was not enjoying Nathaniel's humiliation. That was not who she was. What moved her was something older. She was watching a door open that had been locked from the inside for generations. The stopwatch read 31 seconds. Angela circled the residual term. Her marker made a small tapping sound against the board. Tap, tap, tap. Then she froze. It was subtle. Most of the audience did not catch it. Evan did. Margaret did. Nathaniel did. Angela stared at the final expression. Then at the original slide behind it, her face changed. Not fear, recognition. Slowly, she lowered the marker. The auditorium tightened around her silence. Nathaniel saw his chance. He spread his hands. Well, he said, forcing lightness into his voice, it appears the clock is less forgiving than the internet. A few nervous laughs appeared, weak and scattered. Angela did not look at him. She walked past him toward the side of the stage, where the presentation laptop sat open on the podium. She did not touch it. She only looked at Evan. "Evan," she said. His head snapped up. "Yes? Pull up Professor Pierce's published version." Nathaniel's face went still. "The what?" "The version from his paper," Angela said. "The one in the Journal of Mathematical Analysis. The original boundary statement." Evan did not move. He looked at Nathaniel. That small glance told the whole room more than any accusation could have. Nathaniel stepped toward him. "There is no need for that," Margaret stood. "Yes," she said, "there is." Evan swallowed. His fingers shook as he opened his laptop. The projector flickered. For a moment, the screen showed his desktop, cluttered with folders and unfinished drafts. Then the journal PDF appeared. The room leaned forward. Evan placed the published equation beside the slide Nathaniel had presented that morning. At first, some people did not see it. Then they did. A constraint had been added. Small, technical, easy to miss if you were not looking. A bound near the imaginary axis. It was not in the published paper. It was on Nathaniel's slide. The silence that followed was not academic. It was human. Betrayal has a sound. It is the sound of people realizing they trusted the wrong voice. Rachel Morgan whispered, "Oh my God." Evan stared at the screen like he had found his own fingerprints on a broken window. Margaret turned slowly toward Nathaniel. "Professor Pierce," she said. 2 words. That was all. Nathaniel's mouth opened, but his confidence was gone. He looked from the paper to the slide, from the slide to Angela, from Angela to the camera. The live stream count had passed 12,000. Angela stood beside the board, still holding the marker he had thrown at her feet. Then she looked at Margaret. "Professor Ellis," she said, "with your permission, I would like the clock restarted on the original problem." She paused. Her eyes moved to Nathaniel. 2 minutes is more than enough. Margaret Ellis walked to the podium without looking at Nathaniel. That hurt him more than if she had shouted. She stopped the stopwatch, picked up the eraser, and wiped away the added constraint with one clean stroke. The black ink smeared for a second before disappearing. A small technical line. Gone. But everyone understood what had just been erased. Not just notation. A lie. Margaret turned toward the room. "For the record," she said, her voice controlled, "we will proceed with the published version of the problem." Nathaniel stepped forward. "Margaret, this is absurd." She did not turn. The challenge was public. The problem is public. The correction will be public. A few people in the audience nodded. Not dramatically. Carefully. The way people nod when they are afraid, but less afraid than they were a minute ago. Nathaniel saw that too. He was losing the room. For men like him, that was worse than losing an argument. Margaret set the stopwatch back to 2 minutes. Angela stood at the board, shoulders squared, marker in hand. The lights above her were too bright. She could feel sweat gathering at the back of her neck. Her work shoes pinched at the heel. Her right hand ached from gripping the marker too tightly, but her face stayed calm. Inside, though, something was moving. Not fear exactly. Memory. Her mother in a hospital bed, smiling with cracked lips and telling Angela not to quit school for her. Marcus at 12, standing in the kitchen with a math worksheet and eyes too old for his face. The MIT withdrawal form on a computer screen. The submit button. The silence after. Angela had spent years telling herself the same sentence. I chose my family, and that was true. But another sentence had lived underneath it. I disappeared. Now the whole room was looking at her, and being seen felt almost as painful as being ignored. Margaret raised her thumb over the stopwatch. "Ready, Ms. Reed?" "Ms. Reed. Not facilities, not the woman with the mop. Her name." Angela swallowed once. "Yes, Mom." Margaret clicked the stopwatch. "Begin." Angela turned to the board. The room held its breath. She started again. Boundary corrected. Second line, substitution. Third line, domain preserved. This time, no one interrupted. The marker moved faster. Not rushed. Certain. The proof unfolded like a road she had walked alone for years, and was finally showing to other people. Evan Miller stood now, notebook open against his chest. He was copying every line with shaking hands. He had followed Nathaniel for 4 years. He had believed brilliance meant sharpness. confidence, cruelty dressed up as standards. Now he watched Angela write, and something in him broke open. She had it, he whispered. She had it before today. Rachel Morgan heard him. She turned slightly. What do you mean? Evan looked at Angela's cleaning cart near the back aisle. The duct-tape textbook sat half hidden beneath the bottom shelf. His face went pale. I have seen that folder, he said. Rachel's eyes sharpened. What folder? But Evan did not answer, not yet. Shame had wrapped itself around his throat. At the board, Angela drew gamma again. The small loop, the hidden path. The move that made the problem breathe differently. A faculty member in the front row whispered, beautiful. This time, no one told him to be quiet. The live stream count climbed past 20,000. Across campus, laptops opened in offices. In a cafeteria, 2 custodians watched on a phone propped against a napkin dispenser. One of them, an older man named Clarence, removed his cap slowly when he recognized Angela. She works nights, he said. 3rd floor. The woman beside him stared at the screen. That is Angela? Clarence nodded, eyes wet. That is Angela. In his dorm room, Marcus had called their grandmother in Atlanta. He held the phone near the laptop speaker with both hands. Grandma, look, he said, though she could not see clearly on her old phone. It is Angie. She is doing math. Real math. In front of everybody. His grandmother's voice shook. Your mama would be standing up right now. Marcus pressed his fist to his mouth. On the stage, Angela circled the symmetry. The room made a sound, soft, stunned. The expression began to collapse again. Line by line. Nathaniel stood near the panel table, rigid. His hands hung at his sides. He had stopped pretending to supervise. He was watching his own myth being reduced in public. The stopwatch read 51 seconds. Angela wrote the residue. 42 seconds, she simplified. 38 seconds. She underlined the transformation. 30 seconds. Nathaniel suddenly moved, not toward the board, toward the panel table. He grabbed a thin personnel folder from beneath his notes. Margaret saw it. Nathaniel, she warned, but he was already turning to the audience. His face was flushed. His voice was loud. Before we crown a miracle, he said, perhaps this room should know who is actually standing at that board. Angela's marker stopped. The room went cold. Nathaniel held the folder high enough for the camera to see it. For one breath, Angela did not move. The marker rested against the board. The proof waited unfinished beneath her hand. The stopwatch kept running, but nobody looked at it anymore. Margaret stepped forward. Do not do this. Nathaniel ignored her. He opened the folder with a snap. Angela Denise Reed, he said. Former undergraduate at MIT, enrolled in mathematics, withdrew before completing her degree. No doctorate, no master's, no published papers, no peer-reviewed record of any kind. His voice sharpened on every sentence. Facilities employee at Harvard for 11 years. The words were not information. They were weapons. Angela stood still, facing the board. Only her fingers moved. They tightened around the marker until the plastic creaked. A woman in the 5th row said, that is enough. Nathaniel spoke over her. This is not a fairy tale, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a movie where a cleaning woman magically becomes a mathematician because it makes everyone feel virtuous. Rachel Morgan's face had gone pale. She knew she was watching something that would be quoted, investigated, dissected. But more than that, she knew she was watching a man choose cruelty because truth had cornered him. Evan Miller looked sick. He stood halfway, then stopped. Shame pinned him in place. Nathaniel turned toward Angela now. You were at MIT and left, he said. That is the record. You had the door open and you walked away. So please let us not pretend the institution failed to see you. The room reacted. Soft gasps, a few angry voices. A chair scraped. Margaret's voice cut through it. Professor Pierce, sit down. He did not. He could not. A man losing power will often reach for the only thing he has left. Permission to wound. Nathaniel smiled, but it trembled. And as for my earlier offer, he said, I think we can all agree that marriage was intended as a joke. A generous joke. Because surely nobody here believes this is the woman I should take home to my family. The silence as after that was different. Not shocked, disgusted. Angela closed her eyes. For 2 seconds. That was all. But in those 2 seconds, she was not in Hall G anymore. She was 21, standing in a hospital corridor in Cambridge, holding a paper cup of burnt coffee. Her mother lay behind a curtain, smaller than she had been the week before. Marcus sat on the floor beside the vending machine, with his knees tucked against his chest, trying to finish 7th grade homework under fluorescent light. Her phone had buzzed that day. MIT registrar. Final withdrawal confirmation. She remembered staring at the word confirmed until the letter stopped making sense. Her mother had whispered, "Baby, no." Angela had smiled and lied. It was not just a semester. It became a year. Then 5, then 11. Rent, medicine, school lunches, bus passes, work boots, Marcus's college application fees. A life measured in things paid late but paid. She opened her eyes. The room was still waiting for her to break. She turned around. Slowly, Nathaniel was still holding the folder. His chest rose and fell too fast. He wanted tears. He wanted rage. He wanted proof that she did not belong. Angela gave him neither. She looked past him toward the camera. "My mother had stage 4 ovarian cancer," she said. Her voice was quiet. The room stilled. "My brother was 12. My father was gone. There was no trust fund, no paid leave from being poor, no committee meeting to decide whether my family could survive without me." Nathaniel's face changed. Just slightly. Angela continued. "I left MIT because somebody had to sit beside my mother when the pain medicine stopped working. Somebody had to sign school forms, cook dinner, keep the lights on, teach a boy how to become a man without letting him see how scared I was." In his dorm room, Marcus dropped to the edge of his bed. His grandmother's voice came through the phone. "Lord, that child." Angela glanced at the old cleaning cart near the back aisle. "I did not stop doing mathematics," she said. "I just stopped being invited into rooms where people called it mathematics." Margaret Ellis lowered her eyes. Evan covered his mouth. Angela turned back to Nathaniel. "You read my file," she said, "but you still do not know my story." Then she faced the board again. The stopwatch had run out. No one cared. Angela uncapped the marker with her teeth, because her hands were shaking now and she refused to hide it. "Restart it," Margaret said. Nathaniel spun toward her. "What?" Margaret picked up the stopwatch. "Restart it." Her voice was steel. "This room has wasted Ms. Reed's time." She clicked the button. 2 minutes appeared again. Angela lifted the marker, and this time, when she began to write, the entire hall stood with her in silence. Angela wrote like the room had disappeared. The first line returned the original boundary to its proper shape. The second line moved the integral into polar form. The third line opened the path Nathaniel had spent 9 years pretending did not exist. No one spoke. Even the people standing seemed afraid to breathe too loudly. The sound of the marker filled the hall. Scratch, pause, scratch, a tiny rhythm against a silence big enough to hold a life. Nathaniel stood near the panel table with the folder still in his hand. It looked useless now, thin, ugly, like something pulled from a drawer that should have stayed closed. He looked at Angela's back and understood, too late, that he had given her the thing she had never asked for. A witness. The stopwatch read 1 minute and 20 seconds. Angela drew the contour again. Gamma, a small loop, one clean curve on the left side of the board. Evan Miller was still standing. His notebook trembled against his chest. He wanted to help, wanted to say something, wanted to become, in that moment, the kind of man he had failed to be for years. But the only honest thing he could do was watch. Rachel Morgan leaned toward him without taking her eyes off the board. "You said you saw her folder." Evan swallowed. "Yes, when?" His throat worked, months ago. Rachel turned her head then, just enough. Evan looked down. There was a fire inspection on the 3rd floor. Facilities left a supply closet unlocked. "I saw a folder under her cart. I thought it was inventory records." His voice cracked on the next words. "It was not." Angela circled the hidden symmetry. The room made that sound again. A soft rush of air. The sound of people seeing a lock open. The expression on the board began to shrink. Not vanish, transform. That was what the best mathematics did. It did not destroy mystery. It showed where the mystery had been standing all along. The stopwatch read 54 seconds. In his dorm room, Marcus was crying now. Not loudly. Not the way people cry when something is lost. He cried like someone watching a debt finally being paid back to a person who had stopped sending invoices. His grandmother stayed on the phone. "Baby," she whispered, "hold it closer. I want to hear her." Marcus turned the laptop volume all the way up. On the screen, Angela wrote the residue. Margaret Ellis stepped closer to the board, not interfering, only following the proof in real time. Her lips moved silently. She checked each transition, each limit, each transformation. Then her face changed. She knew. Before the final line, she knew. The proof was correct. Nathaniel knew too. That was the cruelest part for him. He could not even hide inside uncertainty. The mathematics was not ambiguous. It did not care about his title. It did not care about his chair. It did not care whose name was on the lecture series. The stopwatch read 35 seconds. Angela simplified. 29 seconds. She canceled the final term. 23 seconds. She rewrote the answer on one clean line. The closed form fit inside the width of her hand. For a moment, nobody understood how something that had been made to look so impossible could end so quietly. Angela capped the marker. The sound clicked through the microphone. The stopwatch read 17 seconds. She stepped back. She did not smile. She did not bow. She just looked at the board, as if making sure the work could stand without her. 4 seconds passed. Then a clap came from the back. One clap, sharp, lonely. The young black undergraduate had stood up, both hands trembling, tears on her face. She clapped again. Then Evan Miller started. Then Margaret Ellis. Then the first row. Then the second. Then the entire auditorium rose. The applause hit the ceiling and came back louder. Chairs scraped. Phones shook in raised hands. Someone shouted, "Say her name." Another voice answered, "Angela Reed." Then more, "Angela Reed, Angela Reed." It was not a chant yet. It was a correction. Nathaniel stood inside it like a man caught in a storm without shelter. Angela turned toward him. The applause faded little by little, not because people wanted it to stop, but because they saw she had something left to say. She walked across the stage until she stood 3 feet from him. The microphone clipped near the podium caught her voice clearly. "Professor Pierce," she said, "I want to say 3 things." Nathaniel's jaw moved, but no sound came. Angela lifted one finger. "First, you spent 9 years proving the wrong version of your own problem." A murmur rolled through the room. "Second, the Pierce limit was never impossible. It was just protected by your pride." Nathaniel looked down. Angela stepped half a pace closer. "Third, about your marriage bet." His eyes lifted then. For a foolish second, hope crossed his face. Maybe she would spare him. Maybe she would be gracious in the way people expect the wounded to be gracious, so no one else has to feel uncomfortable. Angela's voice softened. "I will not hold you to it," Nathaniel exhaled. Then she finished. "Not because I failed. I did not fail. I will not hold you to it, because I do not marry men I do not respect." The room froze. Angela looked at the folder in his hand. "And after today, Professor, neither should anyone who respects themselves." Nathaniel lowered the folder. His hand was shaking. For the first time all morning, he looked small. Nathaniel did not answer her. He could not find the kind of sentence that would save him. The folder slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a flat sound. A few pages slid out across the stage. Nobody picked them up. Nobody even looked at them for long. They had already seen enough of what was inside him. Angela turned away. That was what broke him. Not the proof. Not the applause. Not the camera. The way she turned away like he no longer mattered. She walked back to the board, picked up the eraser, and stood before the 2 layers of writing. His old derivation sat above hers, neat and wrong. Her corrected proof ran beneath it, smaller, cleaner, alive. For a moment, she looked at both. Then she erased his. 2 long strokes. One across the false boundary. One across the conclusion that had carried his name for almost a decade. The room watched in complete silence. The eraser left pale dust on the board. Angela set it down. Her own proof remained untouched. Then she walked off the stage. No speech, no bow, no smile for the camera. She stepped down into the aisle and moved past the first row, past the professors still standing, past Rachel Morgan with tears in her eyes and a recorder in her hand. She passed her cleaning cart without touching it. The old calculus book was still tucked under the bottom shelf. The gray folder was still there too, half hidden behind a stack of paper towel rolls. Evan saw it. His chest tightened. "Ms. Reed," he said. Angela did not stop. Her shoes clicked softly against the tiles as she walked out of Hall G and into the corridor, where the sound of the applause became muffled behind the heavy doors. Inside the auditorium, Margaret Ellis walked to the board. She stood before Angela's proof with both hands at her sides. She read the final line again, then the line above it, then the corrected boundary. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wet. She turned toward the audience. "For the record," she said, "the proof presented by Angela Reed appears complete and correct under the original published conditions." The room erupted again. Margaret raised one hand and somehow the hall quieted. "I will be recommending immediate formal review. I will also be contacting the department chair and the dean of the faculty today regarding what occurred in this room." Nathaniel flinched. Now the room looked at him. Not as a genius. Not as a gatekeeper. As a problem. Margaret continued, "And if Ms. Reed permits it, her name will appear alone on the submitted manuscript." Rachel Morgan stood. "Professor Ellis," she called, voice shaking but clear. "Will you say that again for the record?" Margaret looked straight at the camera. "Angela Reed is the author of the proof." Outside, Angela reached the foyer and stopped beside a tall window. Morning had brightened over Cambridge. Students crossed the courtyard with backpacks and coffee cups, unaware that a room behind them had just split open. Angela pressed one hand against the cool glass. For the first time since she picked up the marker, her breath broke. One sharp inhale, then another. She covered her mouth. Not because she was ashamed, because her body had finally understood what her mind had done. The door behind her opened. Evan stepped out, holding the gray folder against his chest. Angela turned. Her eyes dropped to it. The folder labeled Cleaning Inventory, Quarter 3. Her folder. For a second, the hallway narrowed. Evan stopped several feet away. "I am sorry," he said. Angela stared at him. He looked younger now. Not because he was young, but because guilt had stripped the polish off him. "I found it months ago," he said. "During a fire inspection. It was under your cart. I thought it was inventory. Then I read the first page." Angela said nothing. Evan swallowed hard. "I read all of it." The words sat between them. Behind him, Rachel Morgan came through the door and froze when she saw the folder. Evan's voice cracked. "I knew you were doing real work. I knew it was serious. I should have told someone. I should have told you that I knew. But I was afraid." Angela's face did not change, but her eyes did. Afraid of what? Evan looked back toward Hall G, of him, of losing my position, of becoming the next person nobody listened to. Angela held his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she stepped forward and took the folder from his hands. She opened it. 92 pages. Her handwriting. Her nights. Her grief. Her stubbornness. The life nobody had asked about. Rachel Morgan's voice was soft. "Ms. Reed, may I write about this?" Angela looked at the folder, then at the auditorium doors, then down at her cracked hands. "No," she said. Rachel's face fell. Angela looked up. "Not about the miracle, janitor." Rachel understood. Angela's voice steadied. "Write about the university that walked past her for 11 years. The hallway went silent. Then Rachel nodded. "I can do that." Angela closed the folder against her chest. For the first time that morning, she let herself stand fully upright. By sunset, Harvard had already lost control of the story. The video was everywhere. Not because Angela had shouted. She had not. Not because Nathaniel had fallen apart. He had. But because people understood what they were seeing. A woman in a gray uniform had walked into a room built to ignore her, corrected a famous man, solved his problem, and then refused to let the world turn her pain into entertainment. That night, Rachel Morgan's article went live. The headline was simple. "Harvard custodian solves major mathematics problem after professor publicly humiliates her." But the line people shared most was buried near the middle. Angela Reed was not discovered. She was overlooked. By morning, the university had announced a formal review. Nathaniel Pierce was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into professional misconduct, misuse of personnel records, and alteration of academic materials presented in a public lecture. The department chair released a careful statement. Too careful. But the meaning was clear. The truth had witnesses now. 3 weeks later, Angela sat in a conference room she had cleaned many times but never been invited to enter. The long table shone under soft overhead lights. Outside the window, Cambridge moved through a cold gray afternoon. Margaret Ellis sat beside her. Across the table were the dean, the department chair, 2 attorneys, and a quiet woman from Human Resources who had not looked comfortable since Angela entered. Angela wore a navy sweater, black slacks, and the same old glasses. The white tape was gone. Marcus had fixed them himself with a tiny repair kit from the drugstore. The dean folded his hands. "Ms. Reed, on behalf of the university, I want to apologize." Angela looked at him. She had imagined this moment might feel like victory. It did not. It felt like paperwork arriving late to a funeral. The dean continued. "We are prepared to offer a research appointment, full salary, benefits, and support for formal publication of your work. We will also cover legal review regarding the improper access and use of your personnel file." The room waited. Angela looked at the polished table. She could see a faint reflection of her own hands resting there. Hands that had scrubbed sinks, packed lunches, written proofs at 2 in the morning, held her mother's hand through the last breath. Then she looked up. "I will accept the research appointment," she said, "but I want something added." The attorney shifted. Angela did not blink. "A scholarship fund for non-traditional students, caregivers, working adults, people who leave and come back, people who were told their life interrupted their talent." Margaret's eyes softened. Angela's voice stayed steady. "And I want custodial staff allowed to audit 1 course per semester at no cost if they choose. Not as charity, as access." The dean was silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "We can discuss structure." Angela leaned forward slightly. "No," she said. "We can discuss implementation." That was the moment they understood her power. Not loud power, not cruel power. The kind that comes from a person who knows what they are worth and no longer needs permission to say it. 6 months later, Angela Reed stood at the front of a small lecture room at Princeton. Snow tapped softly against the windows. 12 students sat before her with notebooks open. Some were graduate students. Some were visiting fellows. One was a 58-year-old former nurse, taking her first advanced math course after raising 4 children. Marcus sat in the back row, grinning like he had personally built the building. Margaret Ellis stood near the door, arms folded, pretending she was only passing by. Angela picked up a marker. For a second, she saw Hall G, the laughter, the thrown marker, the cold burn of being made small. Then she saw something else. Her mother's face. Marcus at 12. The yellow folder. The young black undergraduate in the back of the auditorium, clapping first. Angela turned to the class. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to know your names." A young woman in the last row looked startled. Angela smiled. A real smile this time. "Let's start with you." The young woman sat a little taller. And that was the lesson Angela carried forward. Not just how to solve a problem, how to notice the person everyone else has learned to overlook. Because sometimes justice is not one grand speech. Sometimes justice is a door held open, a name spoken correctly, a seat offered at the table, and sometimes it is a woman with cracked hands, writing the truth so clearly that the whole room has no choice but to see it. If this story reminded you of someone who has been underestimated, share it with them. And if you have ever felt invisible in a room that should have known your name, leave one word behind. Seen.